Alright, so this week I figured I would do a video for you guys. Somebody wrote in asking about how to play outside. And I get this question a lot from quite a few of my students. And there's no easy answer necessarily, but I do have a few tips and a few things to keep in mind. The two words I really want you guys to focus on are context and resolution. I'll start with resolution first. Basically, when you're playing outside the harmony, effectively what you're doing is creating tension. And what makes tension effective is the resolution of that tension. So one of the most important parts of your outside moment are going to be the end. How you tie it back into the harmony, or that you tie it back into the harmony that you're actually playing over. That is what frequently it comprises a large part of the success of your outside playing. Now the other thing I mentioned is context, and what I mean by that is the fact that your line, whatever you're playing that's outside the harmony, makes some sort of sense on its own. And I'll give you a few examples so you understand what I'm talking about. But in my mind, when I depart from the harmony, especially if I'm just completely abandoning the harmony and doing something different on my own, what I'm thinking in my mind is this thing that I'm playing needs to make some sort of sense on its own, whether it's by virtue of just intervallic relationships, stacking thirds or fifths or sixths on top of each other, or it being its own kind of harmony, whether it's a diminished line or even just a major 7 arpeggio unrelated to the harmony you're playing over. It makes some kind of sense in and of itself. And then when you then take that and resolve it back, kind of stick the landing, then it becomes something that was kind of a little tense and just a little unsettling. But when you stick the landing and resolve it back home, then all of a sudden everybody's brain goes, oh, that was something really cool. I don't even know what that was. They went outside, but they brought it back and it all made sense, and it just adds to the cool factor of what you play. So I'll give you a few different examples of ways we can explore playing outside. I'm just going to set up a loop of a C minor 7 chord using iReal Pro, which is the app I usually use for these things. But inevitably somebody always asks what app I use. iReal Pro. Okay, so here's a C minor 7 chord. So there's a couple of quick examples of me just kind of dipping out for a second. Actually, I started that whole thing with a D flat major 7 arpeggio. Now, if you're looking at a piece of paper and you see a C minor 7, usually the last thing you'd think to play is a D flat major 7 arpeggio. But, like I said, it creates a little bit of tension. But when I land on that major 7, I'm bringing it back to the root. So it's just a quick, what? Oh, okay, there it is. And then at some point I also played an A flat major 7 arpeggio, resolving to the G, which is the 5th of C minor 7. So D flat major 7 arpeggio, and then a melodic line to kind of reground the harmony. A flat major 7, 7. It's mostly inside. For thinking natural minor, it's actually pretty much all inside. I was thinking Dorian with an A natural. So my first note was out, the remaining notes landed in A flat, C, E flat, A flat, G. I can also do the same thing stacking shapes. Let's say I take stacking 2/5 on top of each other. In C minor, that gives me a C, G, which is the 5th, and the D, which is the 9th. Now I can take that shape and move it around, leaving the harmony, but what I'm playing has its own kind of context. Our brains hear this static shape that's moving around in a parallel way, and then I'm going to resolve it and see if I can make it work. It's hard to play out on demand and play something amazing, but let's see. And try it again. Maybe some completely seemingly random shapes. Try and resolve it back into the harmony and see if that works a little bit. Those are mostly major 6th and tritones. But you hear at the end of every one of those examples, some were more successful than others, but at the end of every one of those I tried to bring it back to C minor and make a melodic statement. So I was taking something, creating a little bit of tension, coming back, resolving it, kind of bringing it back home to the home tonality. So there's any number of ways we can stretch outside the harmony. Sometimes musicians will actually invent their own changes. If you have one static chord playing for 8 bars or open over a C minor 7 chord, you start to run out of ideas pretty quickly. One way to get around that is to start introducing your own chord changes in your mind. Adding 2 5s, 3 6 2 5s, whatever, or any kind of chromatically resolving dominant chords. Anything can kind of work. The key being that you're playing something with intention and then resolving it. You can get away with a lot. The more context your line has, the more it makes sense on its own, regardless of the harmony, the better it'll work, and the better you resolve it, for sure, the better it'll work. The one thing that never kind of works is random. Let me talk about rhythm for a second too, because that's a crucial aspect of this. What you play has to have a solid rhythmic core, because I can play all the right notes in the world, and if the rhythm's not really happening or it feels really hesitant, it won't matter. So here's C minor 7. I'm going to play nothing but notes, diatonic to the C minor 7 chord, but with weak harmony. 3 4. notes in all the wrong ways. No real conviction to it. A little hesitant, a little scared sounding. Now I'll play all the wrong notes, but with strong rhythm, and resolve it. 1, 2, So most of that was kind of ignoring the harmony altogether, but it worked at least better than the right notes with the wrong rhythm did, in my estimation. So those are some kind of half-baked, off-the-cuff examples for you, but it's kind of the best explanation I can give. I had asked this question myself in my development when I was playing with better musicians. How do you get outside and make it work? And it was usually just met with kind of like, I don't know, you kind of go for it and feel it and hope it works out in the end. And that's the best I've been able to come up with for myself, and that's the approach I take, is essentially making sure that what I'm playing has some kind of relevance in and of itself, or if it is completely random, that it's making sure that the rhythm is dialed in and I'm at least speaking rhythmically with conviction. And then everything at the end is about bringing it back home to whatever tonality I'm locking into and playing over, in order to kind of ground everything, stick the landing is what I call it. So I hope that answers your question, and I hope that helps some of you that may have been considering this and playing around with this idea but not really knowing where to start. I got a lot of mileage out of playing with intervals. Exploring what it sounded like when I stacked different intervals, whether it was major thirds, minor thirds, which is the diminished lick sound, fourths, fifths, playing around with all of that. Here's one last thing you can play around with. I also used to experiment with taking one static chord shape, say a major 7, and then paying attention to what note was in my top note, and then trying to play a simple melody, but holding that static chord shape underneath that, and just holding that chord shape. Don't care what notes I'm playing, doesn't matter. I'm paying attention to that top note. And just paying attention to that top note and playing a melody or a scale. There's an F major scale, holding the major 7 shape underneath. My top note winds up being the 7th of that chord shape. But it occurred to me that it was kind of a cool thing, and again it brought into play that context that I was talking about, and by virtue of that it worked. And it got me thinking, when combined with shapes, how I could try and use that concept. So one simple exercise I played around with, which worked its way into my vocabulary, was practicing playing shapes, stacking intervals, but not worrying about what note I was starting on, but rather paying attention to what note I was going to end on. So thinking, okay, if I start on an F, stack 2 fifths, I end on the 9, I end on a G. So I could practice playing a G major scale. For example, just holding that shape underneath it. I would pay attention to however many strings I was crossing. If I kept stacking up, say over 5 strings, start on an A flat, I end on a C. So I think, aha, if I want to end on a note, I need to start down a major third. So, for example, on the C minor 7 chord, if I think I want to play that stacked fifth over 5 strings, but I want to land on the 9, which is a D. So if I want to land on that D, I kind of do the math in my head. I need to start that on a B flat. So over this C minor 7, and then again, a little melodic statement to bring it back home. Whatever it is. So that idea, I got a lot of mileage out of that concept. Stacking shapes, paying attention, okay, over 4 strings, start on a C, I end on an A, so that's the relative minor, or a sixth above where I started. So I'd maybe have to do a little bit of math, but I would pay attention with all of my shape stacking, completely ignoring where I started, but thinking about where I was going to end up. So that's stacking 2/5, but doing a little bit of open string action in between, and it winds up sounding pretty cool. I'm walking I think it was a G major scale up, so I'm starting F, C, G, G, D, A, and then it's a G major, right? Yeah, so A, E, B, then I need to play B flat, F, to make sure I land on the C. So you wind up hitting some notes that are outside the harmony, but again, everything you're playing has a context of its own, and you're resolving it, especially because you're focusing on what note you're going to land on, so you're really paying attention to how you're going to resolve it, especially if you add a little melodic statement at the end of the lick. So that's just a little addendum. Maybe that'll give you some fuel for the shed, give you some ideas to play around with, stacking shapes, stacking chords, just parallel motion, playing patterns, focusing on that top note. C major, D, E, F. You can take simple melodies. And then it adds a whole new dimension, and then resolve it and you're gold. So hopefully that helps some of you guys a little bit that have been thinking about playing outside the changes, or at least gives you some ideas, something to play around with, come up with your own little licks and patterns and shapes, and explore, see what happens. Right on. I hope that helped some of you guys. Take care.